This is a project we ran in 2008, and kids really liked it, and I think it's got lots of potential. Lots of potential for you to do your own unique design and touches to the piece, and we're going to talk about this today. With any project, I like to make sure that you can individualize it, make it unique to yourself. And you can see I've made myself a little binner out of metal wire, and you've got a removable little booze bottle you might find. Anyways, and there's also graffiti is a possibility for decorating your dumpster, and any other ideas that you have that can make yours special. This dumpster here was decorated by a student who graduated last year, Bruce McDonald. You can see there's a bit of graffiti on the side. You may recognize some of this around your neighborhood, at least I hope not. Anyways, so now you have a few ideas. These dumpsters are painted and then finished with paint markers, and usually you're left with a pretty nice finished product. And the lid opens, of course, on a hinge. Now, in order to begin the dumpster project, you're going to receive or cut out a piece of sheet metal in which all your pieces will be cut from. And this is a diagram that you will be working from. Listed on the diagram is the proper dimensions of all the parts, and you'll notice they're nice and neatly labeled so you can identify them. As you cut them off, I would expect that you get a felt pen and mark each one with your name and the appropriate name of the part, whether it's the front, back, sides, etc., etc. One thing to notice on this is the lid portion of this is actually a little bit narrower than the other pieces, so it'll have to be trimmed at the very end when you're fitting it to your dumpster. There's one component that hasn't been mentioned here, and that is a steel rod which acts as the pivot point for the hinge. The tools that you're going to need for this are a precision square, because we need to make lines which we will cut our pieces off using a power squaring shear. Also associated with a square will be this tool here, which is a scriber. Scriber's got a sharp point, and it's used for scratching a line into your sheet metal, as I will demonstrate. And of course, you're going to need a ruler. And for this one, you're going to need an inch ruler because all the dimensions on the sheet are done in inches. This piece of sheet metal I have here has been pre-cut to the right dimension. The width is correct and the length is correct. And I've added a blue finish to this called layout blue, and that's going to help you see the lines as I make them on my piece. And I'm going to demonstrate that now. So I'm at the edge of a workbench here, and I'm going to demonstrate how to use the square. Now, when we use a square, we want to make sure that our lines that we make are 90 degrees to the side. So the first thing I'm doing is overhanging my piece of sheet metal so that my square can fit right up against that line. And I'm going to take the first measurement off my piece. That's 2 3/4. And I'm going to measure everything from this one edge. All my measurements are going to be accumulative, so I'm going to add each one as we go down. Line it up. 2 3/4, hold it in place, and one quick scribe line. As you can see, the line shows up. And here's an example of the line I made across. Nice and even, and it only took one stroke or one pass using the scriber. Now I'm going to continue the layout until all my lines have been done. Now the next line is 1.75 or 1 3/4 of an inch from this first line we made. So I'm going to add 2.75 and 1.75 and measure that distance. Mark it down on a piece of paper. That is 4.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 4.5. Double check it, looks good. Good, scribe another line. And I'm going to continue on until the end. Now here's my piece all laid out. You can see the lines on there. You'll notice I also labeled it with a felt pen, which will be removed later on. I kind of screwed up on my layout line down here, but I fixed it, so it should be okay. If you screw up a layout line, easiest way is get a felt pen, go over top of it, and then redo the line. I'm at the power squaring shear here, and what I have to do now is cut my pieces. And one important thing is, because we have a 90-degree sides here and we want our cuts to be straight across at 90 degrees to this edge, we're going to use this guide here. When I'm ready to cut, I'm going to slide my piece up, identify the line, and remember, I'm going to look through the top to see where the cutting edge is. You can see the arrow here, and that in the space in between. And when I'm ready, I'll turn it on and begin my cuts. And I cut out the rest of my pieces until I have all my pieces in my hand. Now there's one part of the layout that we haven't completed, and that is this diagonal line across here. I find it's a lot easier to do that when the piece is already cut. Now I'm going to take one dimension. In this case it's 2 3/4. I'm going to measure down, put it right up against my edge, find 2 3/4, put a little line there. And from this side I'm going to measure 2 3/4 up. And from here I'm going to connect the 2 dots. 2 little lines I made. When it's done correctly, it should be laid out perfectly. Okay, I'm just doing a double check here. Always confirm my cutting or my layout before I cut. Double check. Now, in order to cut small pieces in the power squaring shear, we need to hold them. So I've made up this special tool here. I'm going to use a piece of tape to hold it, and that'll allow me to push up and cut along that straight line in the power squaring shear. I'm back at the power squaring shear. I'm going to use this tool, slide it underneath the guard, and just freehand line it up and make the cut. Pieces, and line them up. They should be equal, the same size. Now I have my 2 pieces that are cut here, and if I look at my drawing, I have to locate and mark out for these 2 little holes that I'm going to punch here. So I've got a couple tools here that are going to help me do that. I've got this fancy tool, which is called a vernier height gauge. It's going to measure up from the table the proper distance. I've also got a vernier gauge that's set to 1 inch because that's one of my dimensions. And I've got myself a small hammer and a center punch. So here we go. I'll grab that, scribe a line. You can see it created a nice little line along the surface there. We do that both sides. Grab my other tool, and the intersection of those, both of those lines, is going to be where my center punch mark will go. So here I go. I'm going to mark out the intersection of those 2 lines. Tap it with a hammer. Oh, that's good. And I'm going to give it a little, one more tap. And as you can see, I've got a nice little center punch mark there. I'm going to do that for both of those pieces. Now, last thing I do, I've got the hole punch, and in those locations, I'm going to center punch a 3/16 hole. That's the same diameter as the rod that makes up the hinge. Now, quite often with the hole punch, it'll leave a burr. We have to remove that burr before we proceed. We're going to use a coarse buffer